In this video, we will explain how to use a conversation-based selling approach, which is a sales methodology that focuses more on selling the conversation than on selling the product itself. Not only can this methodology immediately improve your sales results, but it will also simplify how you sell and make selling easier. This approach is very different from what most salespeople do, in that most salespeople use a more product-based selling approach, focused on selling the product in just about every interaction they have with prospects. The problem with that is that when you are performing cold outreach, you're reaching out to prospects who are likely not in buying mode for what you sell at the exact time that they answer your call or that they are reading your email. This does not mean that they do not need your product or cannot be persuaded to buy your product. It just means that there is a mismatch between what you are wanting to talk about with them and where they are mentally at that exact time. The other problem with product selling is that the prospects you are reaching out to are getting sold to every day by a lot of other salespeople. And product selling will flag you as being the next salesperson who is reaching out and trying to sell something. And when you combine that with creating a mismatch between what you're trying to talk about and where the prospect is at, that drastically increases the odds of facing objections, rejection, and resistance. And that will lead to receiving objections like, "I'm not interested. We don't have any budget or money right now. We already use someone for that. And we're not looking at making any changes right now." And the conversation-based selling approach not only completely simplifies how you respond to objections, but it will improve your ability to get around those objections. If you are selling the product, these are all valid reasons to stop moving forward. If you're selling a product and the prospect does not have money, there's no reason to keep moving forward. If you're trying to sell the product and the prospect is locked into a contract, that's a valid reason to stop talking. But if you are selling the conversation, those are actually not valid reasons to not talk more. The fact that you do not have budget today does not mean that it does not make sense to talk today in preparation for when you do have budget. And you can explain that in a very simple objection response that educates the prospect on what you're trying to do, which is sell the conversation by saying something like, "Hey, listen, I understand. And by the way, I want you to know I'm not reaching out to you today to try to sell you anything or sign you up. We are just looking to open the dialogue between our two companies and have an initial conversation. We'd like to learn a little bit more about you, possibly share some information about us if it makes sense." That way, when you are ready to make a change or when your budget does open up, you can know who we are and how we can help. Are you open to putting a brief conversation on the calendar? Again, not only is this an extremely effective way to respond to these very difficult objections, but when you change your mindset to be more focused on selling the conversation, this is a very easy objection response to learn, remember, and say, because all you're really doing is telling the prospect exactly what you're trying to do, which is simply have a conversation. Now, in order to be able to drive prospects to having conversations with us, we first have to reach out and initially get engaged. And that is the initial contact step of the conversation-based selling approach. And there are many different ways to reach out to prospects and generate leads, but for this video, we are going to focus on two of the most common ways that salespeople reach out to prospects. And the first is, of course, cold calling, phone prospecting, reaching out to prospects over the phone. The second is cold emailing. And going through these, starting with cold calling, phone prospecting, cold calling is extremely difficult. But one of the reasons cold calling is difficult is that most salespeople use a product selling approach, trying to talk about the product they sell and get the prospect interested in buying. Even if they can't take the order right there over the phone, they still try to validate interest. And not only is that difficult because you're likely in a mismatched situation where you're trying to sell a product and you're talking to a prospect that is not in buying mode for what you sell, but that is a lot to accomplish in just a few minutes over the phone with someone you've never spoken to before. And this is how a conversation-based approach can completely transform and improve your results, because not only is it more logical to shift and focus more on selling the conversation than selling the product, but it is a lot easier to simply sell the prospect on talking more than selling the prospect on buying or wanting the product that you sell. And with that, the close shifts from closing the prospect on interest in the product to closing the prospect on talking more. And in order to close the prospect on talking more, we can focus on finding a reason to talk more. And the best way to find a reason to talk more is by asking good questions. Now, you may agree with that 100%, but still not know what questions to ask. We actually have a full sales message brainstorming process that will take you through figuring out the most optimum things to say and ask for the product or service that you sell. And there is a step in that process that will help you to create an optimum list of questions to ask, not only during your cold calls, but also during your conversation. And this process will help you to create two categories of questions. The first category of questions is what we refer to as pain questions. These are questions that probe to see if the prospect has the pain points or concerns that you can help with. And the second set of questions are what we refer to as current state questions. These are questions that help you to identify what is the prospect doing in the area where you have something to sell. Now, when you have these questions can actually become the central piece of your cold call and of your cold call script. And we actually have a cold call process that goes through all of these steps and all of these blocks. And I'm not going to go through that here in this video because we've done that in another video, and I'll include a link in the description to the video that goes through our cold calling process. But this will drastically simplify all of the complexities around cold calling because you go from trying to sell the product to simply trying to sell the conversation. And once you identify through your questions that it makes sense to talk more, you can then transition to going for the close by saying something like, well, based on what you've shared so far, it might make sense for us to talk more because we provide, and then you can share a few details around the product or service that you sell, and then go for the close. But I've actually called you out of the blue here, so I'm not sure that this is the best time to discuss this. What do you think about scheduling a brief call on another day where we can dig into this in a little more detail? I'd like to learn a little bit more about you and possibly share some information about us if it makes sense. Are you available next week, say next Tuesday or Thursday morning? Or are you available to continue talking about this right now? Now let's talk about the second way that we might reach out to prospects, which is cold emailing. And based on my experience as being a prospect that a lot of salespeople reach out to, it's my opinion that 90% or more of salespeople use a product selling approach with their cold emails. And that looks something like this. Hello, Michael. I'm with Websites Redesigned for You. We provide website design, graphic design, web hosting. Are you looking to redo your website? Are you available for a brief call? Now, that is a very simplified example of all the different cold email messages that I receive. They're usually longer and have more information, but the general structure is always the same. This is the company I'm with. This is what we sell. Do you need what I sell? Are you available to talk about what I sell? And the problem with that is that that message is selling the product. And that is not only a mismatch with what the salesperson is trying to do and where where the prospect is at, but that flags the sender as being a salesperson who's trying to sell something, usually leading to the prospect quickly deleting the email with either not reading it at all or reading very much of it. I want to actually go back to that cold email and point out the fact that I did include a close for the conversation. And you could push back on me and say, well, this salesperson is selling the conversation. And while that is a little bit correct, I would hold my ground to say, even if you're trying to close for the conversation, if you're closing to have a conversation to talk to me about your product, that's still a product selling approach where you're selling the product. You're trying to meet with me to sell your product. With the conversation-based selling approach, we are selling the conversation not to sell the product. We are selling the conversation to talk more, to learn more about the prospect, and possibly share some information about us. Now you may say, well, if I don't talk about my company and my product, what am I going to say in my cold email messages? And what you can do is you can use the different blocks from your sales message and create an email message for each block. Now, we actually show you how to create and write these email messages and provide you email templates for each of these emails, and I will also include a link to that in the description below. But all of these email messages that we share with you are designed to get you to shift from sending emails that are product selling and trying to see if the prospect needs or wants what you sell, and shift more to educating the prospect on who you are, how you help, and why it might make sense for them at some point to have a conversation with you. All right, let's move on to talk about how to organize and optimize the conversations you're having with these prospects that you've closed on talking more. And if we go back to those product selling salespeople, what they often do is go into the appointment in order taking mode. That is, they have an appointment, they assume that the prospect needs and wants the product they sell, and they show up leaning more on talking about their company and their product, thinking that that's all they have to do because the prospect is in buying mode and ready to buy. The problem with that is that, yes, we've set an appointment, generated a lead, got a prospect to agree to talk to us more, but there is still a lot of work to do before jumping to talking about the product or before assuming the prospect is ready to buy. The next step in the sales process is still not the purchase. The next step in the sales process is the explanation step, which is where we will go into more detail in explaining to the prospect what we have to offer and how we can help. And the goal of the conversation is to sell the prospect on advancing to the explanation. You may hear that and think that what you sell is not very complicated and we don't need another meeting and another sales process step. And that very likely might be the case for many products and services. And the explanation could actually happen at the same time as the conversation. And we refer to that as an instant explanation. And what that might look like is that we have our conversation with the prospect, and during the conversation, we identify that we can help them, and then we throw up our slides or our demonstration right there in the same meeting, and that would be an instant explanation. But whether you have the explanation on the same day and at the same time as the conversation, you can still benefit from optimizing how you organize the conversation. And here are 4 very simple rules that you can follow. And the first is to have an even split of time and attention on the prospect and on you. This is helpful and important to keep in mind because the product selling salespeople spend most of the appointment talking about their stuff, their company, and the product they sell. And a good way to organize the conversation is to focus the first half of the conversation on the prospect. And you can do that by opening with and asking a lot of questions in the first half of the conversation. And then you can have the second half of the conversation on you and how you can help. The optimum way to do that would be to take the information you learn in the first half of the meeting and then tailor everything you say in the second half to connect the dots on how you can solve the challenges and needs and interests of the prospect with the product or service that you sell. And you likely only have enough time to introduce that and discuss that at a high level. And in order to sell your product, you want to dig deeper into that. And so what you do is at the end of the conversation, you can qualify the prospect a little more and then sell them on the next sales process step, which is the explanation. You can actually use those same blocks that we used to create your cold call script to create an outline of what to talk about during your appointment and meeting with the prospect. Now, I actually have a video on how to organize your meetings and all the different things to take into consideration, and I will also include a link to that in the description below. And that is pretty much it. If you have questions or you want more information, the best place to go is salescriptor.com. Thanks for being here. Hope this was helpful, and we look forward to seeing you on the next video. Have a great day. Take care. Bye.